Grace and peace, everybody. Grace and peace. What is going on? Welcome to the live stream. Y'all know who I am. Maybe not. But yes, my name is Alton Johnson, and welcome to the channel. Tonight, we are going to be discussing or having a discussion with Professor Hillel Gray. Now, Professor Gray is a scholar. He is also a Jewish. He's also a Jewish man. Now he is going to be answering a lot of our questions concerning Jewish culture, the Jewish faith, what people, especially in the scholastic world, believe about some of the claims that are being made concerning Israel, concerning, we're going to touch on some things about Black Hebrew Israelites, but basically what we want to do is kind of get a better understanding of what is actually being said, or what is actually the information that's actually out there scholastically. But you guys know, before we get into it, we are going to talk. We're going to actually bring out our supporters. But first of all, let's see who's in the house. We have It's Up Now. He's in the house. We also have Roger Sherman. Grace and peace to you, sir. So yes, we're going to go ahead and give people a couple of minutes to get on. Dr. Gray is still setting up in the background. Dr. Gray, if you can hear me, take your time because I got a couple of announcements that I am going to make. JT Parker, grace and peace, sir. Grace and peace. All right, Eric Alexander. What's going on, Eric Alexander? All right, so I don't want to hold Dr. Gray up too long because you guys know that we can start having these discussions and they can just run on for a while. But you guys know before we get into any type of discussion. Oh, look at that. I'm already messing my setup here. We got to shout out our members. These are the people who support the channel on a monthly basis, and I appreciate all of you guys. First off, we have Leader for Christ. We have Miss Ephesians 2:10, Dunamai Bacchus, Joseph Roberts, Nicole Smith, Latrell Hassel, D. Mav, Ambassador Everett, I'm Chris Duke, Roger Sherman, Anthony Hall, Daryl Lloyd, Montree Cheryl, and Natalia Plummer. Let's give it up for them, you guys. Thank you guys for becoming members, people who support this channel on a monthly basis. Thank you guys so much. Your patronage is greatly appreciated. And also, I want to thank you guys, too, who are subscribers, who subscribe to this content on a regular basis. And you guys show me love by, your super chats. And you also show me, you guys also come in and, give your comments and your 2 cents. Sometimes you guys do email me with certain topics. And, I appreciate all of you guys. And if you guys have not subscribed, take the time to do that now. Hit the subscribe button, hit that thumbs up bell. Hit the bell, the notification bell. So whenever I do go live, you guys will get a notification that I will be going live. All right. So before we get started and before I bring my guest on, since he is a guest, the type of guest that we don't usually have in the house, I'm going to lay out a couple of ground rules. All right. So, and I want to lay this out because I want people to understand the type of conversation that is going to be had today. And I don't want people to start saying all types of wild and crazy stuff in the comment section. So I kind of want to get this out of the way first. All right. So first of all, Dr. Gray is not a Christian. He is actually a Jew. Okay. So that is going to be the difference between him and I and what we believe about the Bible, scriptures. Of course, there's going to be some things that we do disagree with. So I'm just putting it out there just in case you guys hear the conversation and you're wondering why I'm not pressing him on certain things. This is why we are just having a conversation. I want to know what people in the scholastic world has to say about some of the beliefs and, how they view us as Christians. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, Dr. Gray will not be discussing his personal practices or beliefs as a Jew. So he's not going to tell you if you are keeping Shabbat the right way because he does it a certain way. All he's going to do is tell you how, or he probably will explain if we do have that question come about, how the ancient people and how the scholars view the Shabbat, what day, etc., things like that. So he's not going to impose how he keeps it. He's not going to tell you whether you're right or wrong based on how he does it, right? We're just bringing out the information. All right. Number three, this is not a debate. Okay. So me and Dr. Gray are not here to debate. We're not going to have a back and forth. So like I said, again, he's probably going to say some things that I do disagree with, but we're not going to have some big drawn out debate. That'll be for a later time. So just kidding. Number four, I want to let you guys know if you are sensitive to this type of topic, because I know that sometimes, we can all get emotional when we start to hear certain things come out. If this is a type of conversation that could possibly trigger you, I would say, just excuse yourself from the conversation and maybe watch a playback or something, on your own time. Let me see. All right, number 5, comments will not be posted during the conversation because I don't want to distract Dr. Gray with comments coming up on the screen because somebody may post something, I may put it up. He may be in the middle of a thought, or he may want to address something that is being brought up on the screen. So I kind of want to refrain from doing that. Let me see. Number 6, we're going to hold all questions to the end. So if you guys are posting questions in the chat, it's nothing personal. I got a few questions that I want to ask him first, and then whatever questions that I don't have towards the end, and I'll let you guys know that we can go ahead and ask those questions, and then we'll have him answer them accordingly. And number 7, depending on how the conversation is going and how much time we got left, I will try to put the link out there so people can hop on one at a time and ask a question just for 1 minute. You got 1 minute to ask a question. Dr. Gray will respond, and then there will be a follow-up question or a follow-up response, and then Dr. Gray will respond after that. And we'll just, we'll try to keep it moving because I know that conversations like this can go on for a while. So me putting the link out there is going to be tentative to how this conversation this is going to determine whether or not I do put the link out. So, but without further ado, without all my babble, man, we're going to go ahead. We're going to bring on Professor Hillel. Give it up for him, guys. How you doing today, sir?
This is great. Good to see you, or Mr. Johnson.
Great. Good to see you too, sir. Good to see you.
You can hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you okay. I had to switch my microphone.
It's wonderful to hear all these ground rules. I don't know if they're all necessary, but it's just wonderful to see somebody. You're so organized. You know your audience. You're trying to protect me, which, protect me from the intensity. I don't know if I need that, but protect me from the distractions. Like of the comment thing. I think that's probably a wise move. But I do want to encourage you to let other people ask questions. And if we get into a debate, I appreciate also what you're saying. But anyway, it's wonderful to be here. I really appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I don't know, maybe depending on how this conversation goes, maybe we can set up a part 2 or something to where I can kind of grill you on certain things, when it comes to the Bible, but we'll see.
Let's see if you enjoy,
yes, sir.
You enjoy 10 minutes of me, and then we'll go from there.
All right. Okay. Dr. Gray, now, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, like your background and what degree that you hold in this particular field of study?
Sure. I grew up in Boston. I went to Brookline High School. I went to Yale College. I studied economics. I have a BA in economics from Yale. And I did a couple different careers based on that. So I used to study corporate business social responsibility. So I was sort of like I'm sorry. Even before that, I was an advocate on pensions and pension rights, like retirement rights. Then I used to work on corporate social responsibility. That segued into a job in the environmental field. I was the policy director of the National Environmental Law Center. And then we got involved in things like the environmental justice movement, the People of Color environmental justice movement. And I thought, I should be studying these kinds of environmental issues from my own religious and cultural heritage. And so I got a PhD at, first I got a master's degree at Harvard University. And then I got a PhD at the University of Chicago, where I studied religions, and my focus was really probably mostly on Judaism and ethics. And is that the kind of background you meant?
Yeah, all of it. I mean, yeah, whatever information you want to bring out about yourself, yes, we want to hear it all so we can know exactly who we're talking to.
Yeah, so what else you wanted me to say? I was raised in a Jewish family, a relatively moderately observant Jewish family in what's called conservative Judaism, which is actually a liberal form of Judaism, as you may know. And I have been involved with all sorts of Jewish communities, visited all sorts of Jewish communities on the far left and on the far right, and based partly on my father, may he rest in peace, I tend to feel comfortable with all sorts of shoes of all stripes and polka dots. Again, ask me more.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, because I got a slew of questions, and I'm pretty sure what I got, the audience have. I'm pretty sure they even got more questions than I have. So now, scholastically, from a scholastic standpoint, can you define Judaism, or what is Judaism when we hear that term?
Wow, that's a
Or
great question.
can it
That's
be,
a great question.
summed up?
Oh my
Okay.
God, there are books now being written on how do you define Judaism. It's like people were not asking this question, but actually now in religious studies, this becomes an important thing. Religious studies has sort of gone back to basics, and what we used to take for granted, like the meaning of the word religion, that is a whole big debate. Like, how do you define what a religion is, and when did the term religion really start to be used? And the same thing around the term Judaism. So the way I would tend to use the word Judaism now, I would tend to define it in terms of rabbinic Judaism, because I think that's sort of how people use the term nowadays. And it is a religion that grew out of Israelite or Judean culture after the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. But there are other forms of Judaism besides rabbinic Judaism, right? So you have, for instance, Karaite Judaism, which is a non-rabbinic form. It emerged really sort of in a strong way in the medieval period, and it actually flourished up until the early modern, maybe beginning of the modern period, and now it is sort of very small community of people who are still in these Karaite groups, as far as I know, and they are a non-rabbinic form of Judaism. Is this the kind of question? Is this the kind of thing you're asking me? So for instance,
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
there's an association of Jewish studies, right? And in this association of Jewish studies, people study the history of the Jews, and those Jews are mostly considered the people who follow rabbinic Judaism or who have left rabbinic Judaism but are still in those communities. They may not be religious, right? And there's certainly a big difference between the history of the Jews and the history of Judaism, because Judaism is a religion, right? It's sort of focused as defined in terms of a religion of the Jewish people. But there are many Jewish people who are secular or atheist, or not involved with the religion. An example would be people who are nationalists, right? So the early Zionist movement in the 1900s, I'm sorry, in the 19th century, the 1800s, the early Zionist movement, many of those people were secular. They weren't interested in Judaism, but they were clearly very invested in the Jewish community.
All right. So yeah, because that brings me to my next question. I'm glad that you mentioned that. Now, is Judaism based on ethnicity? Because just like you use the word or use the term secular Jew, right? Or you use like atheist Jew, because I've run into a couple of people who were somewhat atheists, but they call themselves Jews. For instance, when you look at a guy like Jerry Seinfeld, like some people would consider him like a quote unquote secular Jew. Because that will kind of bring me back to my question: is Judaism or being a Jew something that is an ethnic claim, or is it by practice?
Well, there's a lot of discussion over how to define what is a Jew and how to define Jewish identity. There's a lot of debate over it. Right now, in the period that we're in, many people are invested in the notion that you should define it in terms of like an ethnicity, or some people use the phrase ethno-religion, where they're combining the word ethnicity and religion. People don't want to define the Jews as a race because of the history of the Nazi era. Am I allowed to talk about these kind of things?
Listen, you can talk about whatever you want to talk about. You just can't use curse words. We just don't allow profanity on the
Okay,
on the
so
channel.
so it used to be Jews were seen as a race, as you may know, right? And so it was not uncommon for people to refer to Jews as a race. Jews themselves talked about themselves as a race during the period that, racial science, so-called racial science, came into play in the 1800s, say, late 1800s, right? But since the horrors of eugenics and the horrors of the Nazi era and the people have really, it's really been a sort of a backlash against considering Jews at all as a race. So they try to figure out different ways of talking about it. But yes, some people like to talk about it as a kinship system or like a family kind of system, right? Because a lot of Jewish identity is seen as passing down from family descent, right? That if your mother is Jewish, it's assumed that you're Jewish and you're raised as Jewish. And that's probably a large part of the Jewish community are people who are descended from other Jews, right? And so you have then sort of famous, or I don't know, certain kind of people, celebrity people like Madeleine Albright comes to mind. I think, wasn't she somebody who found out that there was, a Jewish identity in her family? So then this question of, does she now have a Jewish identity, right? So there is this issue of descent, but it is contested. It's always debated among Jews and probably in relationship to non-Jews as well, who is a Jew. So, for instance, in the United States, you have a very large movement called Reform Judaism. And in Reform Judaism, they accept patrilineal descent. So if your father is Jewish and not your mother, you may also be able to be recognized as a Jew. So this makes it very much a system that you can relate to as an ethnicity, or maybe as a set of related ethnicities, right? Because Jews who are, say, from Sweden and Jews who are from Ethiopia, they don't really look like they are from the same ethnicity. And yet they may experience themselves as a kind of kinship relationship to each other. Now, you also have a very large number of people. I don't know. There are so few Jews in the world, to say very large was an exaggeration. Sorry. But there's a fair number of people relative to the Jewish population who become Jews by conversion, right? And so that's a fair number of people. And again, there are different Judaisms. There's no single Judaism system. There are many different Judaisms. Like I mentioned, Reform Judaism. I mentioned conservative earlier. There's Orthodox forms of Judaism. And these each have their own ways of accepting people who are non-Jewish into their community through conversion.
All right. Now,
I came across this really simple, because it's a very complex situation.
Yeah, and I'm glad that we're having this conversation because, like we in our previous discussions, behind the scenes, we have kind of had some small conversations about this, and and we just want to be able to get the information out to know exactly what people, especially people who are actually studying the religion and the practices, because I think that it, in some cases it does affect us as Christians to understand what Jewish culture is, and to understand what are the difference between Judaism and Christianity, and how all of that comes about. So I think it's good that we try to get as much information as we can, so we can just have a better understanding, so we can continue to further these types of conversations.
Right. I want to
Yes, sir.
I want to emphasize, just like the very first thing I said when you asked about Judaism, that there are now books written on the debate over this. So scholars, academics do not agree on these terms, and at the margins or at the boundaries, there's especially conflict, right? So there's conflict over things like the Black Hebrew religions that you and I have talked about, right? There's conflict over the group of people known as Messianic Jews, right? So these are people who don't seem to fit within the conventional mainstream of rabbinic Judaism, but may have a claim to being called a Judaism, right? Scholars, my colleagues, are going to disagree over where to place those folks. And so, for instance, and it has practical implications. They have a trade association. They have an academic conference. Do they allow somebody to come in and give an academic paper who studied the Messianic Jews? Right? They may say, no, that really belongs at a Christian conference.
Yeah.
So
So
I don't
basically,
tend to
oh,
be speaking for a broader consensus of academics or something.
yeah. Okay. So basically, what you're saying is that there is no, I guess, you won't be able to put Judaism into a box and say that unless you check off all of these things, that is what defines you as a Jew. So it can be, it's from an array of things that can determine whether or not someone is a Jew or not. Basically,
I mean,
like for instance, somebody. Oh, go ahead.
well, again, as I started to say, this relates also to the concept of what is a religion, right? So some people say a religion can be identified by certain substantive criteria. For instance, do you have a community where they believe in a God? Well, that's a religion. That would be one way to do it. A very different way to do it is to say people who say that they have a religion have a religion. Right. So another way to do it is based on people's self-identification. If maybe not one individual, but if you have a community of people that get together and say we have a religion, that might work. Okay. And in fact, the Supreme Court of the United States has debated these different approaches to how to identify religion because it's very important for the what's the word execution, the implementation of laws dealing with religious freedom and establishment of religion, right? So the same thing can be said about Judaism, right? Some people will say there are certain criteria that determine if you're a Jew, certain criteria that will determine if it's a form of Judaism, substantive criteria. And other people will say, no, it really depends on whether you identify as a Jew, whether you identify as a form of Judaism. So those are two very different theories of how to identify Jews and Judaism.
Okay. Now I want to ask you this next question. Um, it can you be identified as a Jew through DNA? Because I was watching, I was not watching, but I was actually reading an article, and this had to be maybe a couple of years ago, and I think that there was something that had come out with the Israeli government where you did have a sect of Jews, and I think that they were like a minority in Israel who were saying that unless you carried a certain marker in your DNA that came from your mother, something from the mitochondrial DNA, that determined whether or not a person was a Jew. But then there was some other Jews who had some pushback from it, who said that DNA has nothing to do with it. It's all about practice. It's all about what has been passed down. Or you could become a convert. So, how true is it that a person can be identified as a Jew through DNA? Or
Yeah.
does any one of your colleagues can any one of your colleagues affirm that a person can be identified as a Jew through DNA?
Okay. I would I would say that I'm not aware of anyone in academia who says that based on a DNA test, they would then identify you as a Jew, absent everything else. Like I haven't heard that. But and you bring up a really interesting point: is that the state of Israel, just like I was saying, in the United States, we care about the definition of religion. The state of Israel has a whole institutional apparatus where they need to determine and want to determine who is a Jew and who is not a Jew. So there are like real life implications for whether, for instance, a DNA test can prove you to be a Jew. And as far as I know, there's no institution, and I don't know of any academics who base Jewish identity purely on your genome. Um, it is true that there are all sorts of people who believe that they are affirming or confirming their identity through these kinds of genome tests, or that they are learning something about their identity through these genome tests. Um, and I suppose an individual can get a DNA test and they say, okay, well, now I feel like I'm a Jew. And who's gonna dispute that, right? There might be all sorts of people who say, "Oh no, you're not a Jew." That's fine. People in the world have hybrid identities, and we don't have a 1984 totalitarian. Well, we don't have enough of a totalitarian state that we're able to control whether people choose to identify as a Jew. You know, it's not like there's a Yiddish police union that goes around stopping people from identifying as Jews based on a genome test. So you can't stop somebody from doing that. But there are, I don't know of any communities that accept people purely based on that. Right. So if somebody was not Jewish and they got a genome test, as far as I know, all Jewish communities in the state of Israel would require something in addition to that to have somebody become a member of their community.
Right. So you're saying that it just won't stop at DNA. It'll be, this, and then you have to be, required to have this, and it'll just keep going on and on and on. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I
That
mean,
it won't stop at DNA. It'll just be some other requirements later on down the line that'll come about.
yeah, I don't think those requirements are necessarily unusual or onerous, right? For instance, you might be making a claim that your mother is Jewish and that your mother's mother is Jewish, right? I lived in Israel for a year, and during the time that I was in Israel, I had a second cousin who wanted to get married, and there was some concern over her being able to prove her Jewish identity. So I came and I testified before a rabbinic court of 3 judges about her mother. I happen to know her mother, and so I testified about her mother being Jewish and her family being Jewish and so on. Now, I suppose a DNA test nowadays, like you said, might be able to what's the word? Confirm some of or corroborate some of that, but it would be corroborating other kinds of claims. It would not be the sole thing. As far as I know, that at least in my cousin's case, she's claiming to be Jewish, and she has a whole narrative behind that, right? I hope you don't mind
Gotcha.
my stories here.
I'm sorry. What was that?
I hope you don't mind my little stories about the rabbinic court. It was very fun.
Nah. Listen, we want to know everything. We're here to extract as much information out of you as possible. so we're gonna try to get it all tonight. So now we hear, I think nowadays we hear these terms such as Jew, Hebrew, and Israelites. Now, are there a distinction between those 3 categories, or are they one and the same, or do they all kind of intersect at certain points? Can you explain to us what is the difference between a Jew, a Hebrew, and an Israelite?
Great question. And by the way, I think it's an important question. I don't know how much you followed my TikTok account, but at one point I tried to explain some of this in 1-minute TikToks, and I created like a whole graph to try to explain this. But yeah, this is a very important question. And yeah, the 3 terms can overlap, but they also can be used in different ways. And they also are used in different ways in different communities, and they're used in different ways over historical time. So again, it's a somewhat complex picture, but again, it's not unusual. There are many terms in the world that their meanings change over time, and there are competing meanings. In any case, let me try to answer your question. So Hebrew is arguably the oldest term, right? Or it seems to have the oldest potential usage. A Hebrew is a term that comes from the word in Hebrew. Hebrew is also a language, right? But in terms of an identity, in the language Hebrew, it means to pass or to. How do you say that? Like to pass through or to pass over, to sojourn. Okay, and so it applies to Abraham, right? In the stories of Abraham, he is like a Hebrew, and he is somebody who goes from his homeland and he goes into what becomes eventually the land of Israel. Okay, so he is somebody who is passing or moving across borders and stuff like this, right? So those,
So it's almost like a nomad or something.
right, yeah, right. So it's a certain group of people who are then identified as this. It's not a generic term for nomad, but it's a term for a particular group of people who have a sort of nomadic practice. That's what it seems to be referring to in the Bible. And so when we talk about Hebrew, we talk about it as a biblical term first, and then it becomes used later on. Okay, so that's Abraham. Now, the term Israelite is an English term that is related to the Hebrew word Yisrael or Israel, right? And the first person identified as Israel, as you probably know, is Jacob in the Bible. He's Abraham's grandson. So in the biblical narrative, at least, it's a later term. And it literally means something like, somebody who wrestles with God. And the stories of, Jacob wrestling with the entity that he wrestles with. I don't know if you want to say angel or what you want to say. And Jacob has 12 sons, and they are the original, I suppose, children of Israel, right? And they are the ones in the biblical narrative that go into Egypt, and then they create a very large population there, and then they leave Egypt. So those people could be called Hebrews because they were descended from Abraham, but they're also becoming the children of Israel. So there is a large overlap there for most of the biblical narrative, and arguably the terms can be used somewhat interchangeably. Okay, but then it also gets complicated because when they, in the biblical narrative, when they leave Egypt and they eventually get into Canaan, they set up a kingdom called. They set up a kingdom, and the kingdom then splits. And there are two kingdoms, right? There's the northern kingdom and southern kingdom, and the northern kingdom is known as Israel, right? So you have different uses of the word Israel and arguably different meanings of the word Israelite that I would say is more complicated maybe than the word Hebrew. But if you fast forward centuries, right, you eventually have the word Jew emerging, right? And you asked me about Jew too, or did you just ask me about Hebrew and Israelite?
No, Hebrew, Israelite, and Jew.
Right. So the term Jew comes out of the Hebrew word for Judah. Right. So Judah is, I think, the fourth son of Jacob, and it becomes a tribe. So it's one of the 12 tribes. And when the kingdom splits after King Solomon dies in the Bible, you have the northern kingdom called Israel and the southern kingdom called the kingdom of Judah. Okay, so from the kingdom of Judah, you have people who in English we might call Judahites or Judeans, right? And that kingdom survives. The northern kingdom are sort of the 10 lost tribes. They're destroyed by the Assyrians, according to the biblical and according to historical record too. And the tribe of Judah, some of them get exiled in Babylonia, and then they return. And so that the term that later becomes Jew means somebody who is a Judean, somebody who is it's an adjectival form of the name Judah. Okay. Now, the way, as I was saying earlier in our conversation, the way we use the word Judaism now, the way we use Jew now, that really refers to rabbinic Judaism that emerged after the destruction of the Second Temple. Okay. So before that, I've argued, and based on not my scholarship, but based on other historians, that it's a little anachronistic to use the word Jew to refer to people before that period of time. So you might refer to the people who are the Judeans and the Hebrews and the Israelites. You might refer to them as Judeans up until the time of the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE. Now, if you look at things today or the last 100 years, it was not uncommon for Jews to sometimes use the word Hebrew, sometimes use the word Israelite, and they used it interchangeably, right? So you would have organizations like the Hebrew Aid Society, or here in Cincinnati, you have a newspaper called the American Israelite, okay? So that's the American Israelite serves the Jewish community. The Hebrew Aid Society, they serve the Jewish community. So they're using all three terms with considerable overlap. I don't know that they have such great implication, differences in meaning for most of the Jewish world. I don't know that they have that much of a difference. Nowadays, very few Jews that I know really use the term Hebrew or Israelite in popular conversation. How much of that did you catch? Was that useful?
I caught a lot of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it was very, very useful. And basically, I see that there are some people who are in the chat. We got people who identify as Christian, and we got some people who identify as Israel. And I'm glad to see those people a part of the conversation, because I think that you're answering a lot of questions that some of us have kind of been going back and forth about. So yeah, I think you summed that up pretty well. So my next question would be, what is the difference between rabbinic Judaism and Orthodox Judaism? Or are they one and the same?
Or Orthodox Judaism would be a subset of Rabbinic Judaism. But
And
there,
how
there is no, there is no. You can't really put your hands on something called Orthodox Judaism directly. There are different forms of Orthodox Judaisms, right? And they are, in some sense, competing forms. They do recognize each other, I would say, for the most part, but they also have some pretty intense differences and sometimes invalidation. Sometimes they invalidate each other. So, for instance, within Orthodox Judaism, you have a group that's more modernist, and you have a group that's more immersive or anti-modernist, right? And then also within Orthodox Judaism, you have groups that are more geared towards what's called Hasidism. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, which is sort of a pietistic devotional movement that emerged in the 1700s. And then you have groups that are not Hasidic, and in fact were against the Hasidic groups at the beginning. Now they're all on pretty much friendly terms. So Orthodoxy in Judaism is a very fragmented, splintered world. And so we, as scholars and normal parlance people, talk about Orthodox as if it's a single identity, but it's actually very diverse.
All right. So, like for instance, when we do see, like for instance, I see that you're wearing a yarmulke. So, what is the difference between you wearing a yarmulke and the other guys that we see who's dressing all black with the hats on, and they have the curls or the sideburns?
They look better than me, uh, and they also look more stereotypically. If you were to Google the word Jew, and you look at Google Images, I think you'd find more of them. So somehow the popular stereotype, maybe the popular prejudice, maybe the popular bigotry tends to focus on them. Just like when people talk about Christian in the United States, we often think in terms of Christian like, okay, we're talking about white evangelicals or something. When people say we want a Christian country, people go, oh, it's white evangelicals. And there's an enormous diversity of Christians in the United States. But I'm not sure I'm exactly answering your question. What's the difference between us? I mean, for one
Yeah,
thing,
like are the
I should say
practices
that what I'm
different?
wearing
Okay.
does not determine me in terms of my affiliation, right? I could be a liberal Jew. I could be in Reform Judaism, Conservative Judaism. There are various other groups like that people can also wear this kippah or skull cap, and nobody would be bothered that I'm wearing it. I don't think. Right now, if you're an atheist Jew or a secular Jew, you might be sort of surprised it would surprise people if you wore this. But if you're any kind of religious Jew, I don't know that anybody would blink an eye at you wearing a man wearing a skull cap. Now, if a woman starts wearing something like this, it would almost certainly label her as non-Orthodox.
So, all right. So I know you just mentioned Orthodox. So how can an atheist be considered an Orthodox Jew, or are they considered an Orthodox Jew? Like how would you? Because like for instance, in Christianity, we wouldn't say that someone is an Orthodox Christian if they were an atheist. So is that possible in Judaism for somebody to be an
Sure,
atheist yet
sure, it's
still be an
possible.
Orthodox Jew?
Sure, I mean, right. I mean, part of the question again is that Jewish identity doesn't line up exactly with Jewish religion, right? So that's part of the question. But another way to look at it also is in the Orthodox world, you could be a participant and you're not being asked to go through a loyalty test. You're not asked to go through a confessional statement. You don't need to have a profession of faith if you were born into Judaism. So if your Jewish identity is not into question, like your mother happens to be Jewish in the Orthodox case, right? They will accept you as a Jew and you can participate in their Orthodox world. And you can say, hey, I'm an Orthodox Jew. I belong to an Orthodox synagogue. I'm an Orthodox Jew. You could say that, and you can and you might not believe in God at all, right? And in fact, one thing to remember is, in Protestant Christianity, there's an enormous emphasis on the notion of faith, right? And you can obviously speak to that better than I. But faith is like, such an enormous issue in Protestantism, and it's one of the things that maybe you all might have conflicts with Catholics. And when you have conflicts with Catholics, you go, oh, you guys are so into works, and you're critical of Catholics for that kind of thing. Well, Judaism is very much not only a religion that has faith, it's a religion that has works, that has practices, right? And in some ways, it's more similar to Islam than it is to, say, Protestant Christianity on that ground, right? So you can belong to an Orthodox community, and if you are doing the things that Orthodox people will do, people would accept you, I think, very easily and never happen to ask you, oh, by the way, do you believe in God? If you don't believe in God, you might think, oh, you're an atheist, right? But if you're doing all the things you need to do, if you're observing the Sabbath and you're keeping the dietary laws, and people come to your home and they know that you're going to feed them kosher food, people will accept you in the Orthodox world. So I'll give you a term that you probably don't know. I know you're incredibly educated on religious stuff, but you may not be familiar with the term orthoprax. Prax.
I think I've heard that term thrown
Okay,
around a couple of times. Yeah, go ahead.
great, excellent. So this is a whole sort of style of people who observe Orthodox Judaism practices and rituals and activities and ceremonies, but they may or may not hold by Orthodox doctrine. So they have the practice part down, okay? And by the way, somebody can be orthoprax and not want to go to an Orthodox synagogue. They might go to a conservative Judaism synagogue. So they may be non-Orthodox in their affiliation, but orthoprax in their behavior.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, a lot was said there. Especially when it comes to. Oh, are you all right? You need me to take you off camera for a minute? Put you in the back real quick.
Oh, do you feel I said too much? That's all.
No. You haven't said too much. No,
You,
no.
do you have a way to
Yeah,
cut off my mic when you need to, so you can ask me the next question?
oh, you wanna yeah, you can you can hit the mute button at any time.
No, but you can hit it on me if you feel like I'm going on too long. Just
uh no, we here, like I said before, we're trying to get as much information out of you as possible. We these are the questions that we want to ask, and I kind of want to remind everyone who may be coming in late. I do see a couple of questions in the chat. We are going to hold all questions until the end because I do got a few preliminary questions that I do want to ask Dr. Gray, and he will be answering those once I get done with my questions. I think I only got like a few more. All right, so now, Dr. Gray, when it comes to a person who is a convert, now let's just say me myself, I'm a Christian and I decide that I want to convert to Judaism. And I do believe in God, I do believe in Yahweh, but you do have another guy who has been born as a Jew, and he is a person who is an orthoprax, or am I using that term correctly? Or he orthopraxes, orthopractices. But yeah, if he falls up under that particular title, how would I be accepted as a convert in Orthodox Judaism versus a person who is born into the Jewish faith who may not believe in God? Like, let's just say, for instance, I say, hey, I want to get closer to God. I want to be a Jew. I'm becoming a Jew because I want to be closer to God. But then you have another Orthodox Jew says, well, I'm a Jew because of my bloodline and I don't believe in God. How will we be viewed differently amongst Orthodox Jews, or will we all just be viewed the same?
Well, I mean, an Orthodox Jew who is orthoprax and does not believe in God might be thought of as a sinner. They might be thought of as heretical. They might be cautious not to announce to the world that they're an atheist, right? So I do know atheists in the Orthodox world, and they do not go about announcing it. They'll tell me privately, but they're not going to stand up in the front of a synagogue and deny the existence of God or something like that. So when I say that they're accepted, I say that they're accepted under, conditions of, social norms, of, what the norms of social discourse are in the Orthodox world, which tends to be you don't tell people you're an atheist if you're an atheist. If you are, okay, so now you want to come and join the Jewish people and convert to Judaism, okay?
Correct.
And, if you are saying I'm still a Christian in my beliefs, I don't know of any Jewish community that would accept you. Now, we do have the whole issue of the Hebrew Israelite world, right? So some of the Hebrew Israelites, like the Hebrew Pentecostals, they might feel very comfortable with you, but I'm not sure that I would call the Hebrew Pentecostals a Judaism. I would call them a Christianity,
Yeah,
right?
that's a good point. Now we're gonna get into some of those questions a little bit later.
Okay, but just going back to Orthodox Judaism or conservative or Reform Judaism, if you go to any of the main or even the smaller Judaisms that I know of, and you said, I want to convert, and it came out that you believed in Jesus as the Messiah, Jesus as fully human, fully divine, they would probably not accept you. Or they would almost certainly not accept you. They would say, why don't you why don't you come back, or why don't you hang out until you're ready to let go of your belief in Jesus? Because there is
Mm.
no form of Judaism, rabbinic Judaism, that has Jesus as a figure in their theology.
So, like for instance, one of the arguments that we do get, and I've gotten myself, that they'll say someone like the Apostle Paul in the New Testament. They'll say that, well, Paul was an Israelite, and he was a Jew. Well, some will say he was a Jew. Some will just say no, he was a Benjamite, and sometimes that's disputed. But one thing that people will say was that he was an Israelite who followed Christ. So therefore, since he was able to follow Christ and hold his Jewishness, then therefore, um, now that I am, for all clarity, that now I'm a black man. I figured out who I am now. I figured out who I am in Christ, but being a Jew is my ethnicity, or being an Israelite is my ethnicity, and I can kind of hold to the two. Um, are you saying that people who are more Orthodox or rabbinic Jews will basically reject that claim that you can be a Jew or hold to Jewish practices and still follow Christ? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it's not
And,
about Orthodox.
and I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm just asking questions for clarity.
Not at all. It's a totally wonderful question. I love talking about this, and I love how respectful you are. And if you want to be a little less respectful, I think I can handle it.
Uh,
But in any case, it's not about being Orthodox. It's the non-Orthodox forms of Judaism also would not accept a person who says that they still believe in Jesus as the Christ. Okay. Now, Paul, the apostle, is in a different situation than you, because Paul, his mother is Jewish, or, well, they're all passed away. So Paul's mother was Jewish. So Paul was accepted as a Jew before he had his epiphany and before he became a follower of Jesus. So Paul was already a Jew, but then he becomes arguably a more heretical Jew when he starts to follow Jesus. But in those days, it wasn't all clearly set out, right? There was no such thing as Christianity. There wasn't a Christian community. There was a movement of Jesus followers, and they were all Judeans. They were all what we sometimes call Jews or sometimes call Israelites, however, like you said, however you want to call that group. They were all Second Temple people who came out of that milieu, right? So their identity was never in question. It was really over the centuries after that that it became more of a parting of the ways between the people who become the Jews and the people or stay as Jews and the people who become Christians. Okay, so comparing yourself to the Apostle Paul, I mean, in some ways it's good a comparison because you're both very intelligent and you both care about religion, but your identity situations are very different. Paul was a Pharisee before he became a follower of Jesus, and you don't have the benefit of that or
So
the
you're basically, oh, I'm sorry.
disadvantage of that.
So you're basically saying that when Paul, um, for lack of a better term, when he converted, when he gave his life to Christ and he started to follow Christ, at that point there was a clear distinction from him being Jewish versus him being a Christian. So once he
No,
became,
no,
so
no,
basically,
no, it was
go ahead.
not a clear distinction at all. There was
All
no
right.
such thing as from a historian standpoint. I'm now talking as a historian, not as
Yes, sir.
a religious person. From a historian standpoint, there was no Christian community at the time of Paul's epiphany or of his conversion, right? If you want to call it conversion, there was no Christian community. He did not have to leave the world of Jews and Judaism in order to do what he was doing. As far as we could tell, to the extent that we know what was going on. So he did not face that kind of split, right? But by the time you get to the year 300s, right? By the time you get to the 4th century, that split is extremely clear and institutionalized, right? And so at that point, somebody who decides to be Christian, they are really not being Jewish anymore, right? They're not going to be persecuted as a Jew. They're going to be accepted by the Roman Empire as a Christian,
Mm, that's
right?
interesting. That
But
is very interesting.
at the time of Paul, there was no sharp distinction like that. There were plenty of Jews who were Christ followers, not necessarily a large number, but there was a Christ following, Jesus following movement, and most of those people at the beginning certainly were Jews, right? And they were just sort of a quirky form of Judaism, um, just like there were other forms of Judaism floating around at that time. After the destruction of the temple in 70 CE, the Jewish world was in enormous crisis, right? They were suffering incredible oppression under the Roman Empire. The center of their religion had been demolished. They had to figure out how they were going to get along. The community, the society, I think, was in somewhat shambles around 70, even more so at 135 when there was another rebellion. They were crushed even more. So that society was in a certain kind of chaos. There were many different kinds of Jewish groups around or Israelite groups around, including the Jesus movement, right? And they didn't stand out the way you're describing it. They did not become this distinctive split until well after Paul, I would say.
Ah, okay, okay. So therefore, they were people that it's safe to say that they still uh they still observed the Shabbat. They may have still gone to the temple. They still may have eaten kosher foods, things
Sure,
of that
absolutely.
nature.
And from the New Testament that there were debates over circumcision, right? So that was
Yes,
debates
sir.
among followers of Jesus who were Jewish and saying that we should follow Jesus and continue the Jewish practice of circumcision, right? Just like you're saying, Sabbath and kosher laws and the other Pharisee laws, those Jesus followers, they were mostly Pharisees. Jesus himself was arguably a Pharisee.
They go. That's gonna spark some conversation in the chat with what you just said right there.
Bring it on, bring it on. This is not something Dr.
Ah,
Gray is. I am not an expert, by the way. This is not my specialty, but it is very well known, and so it's very easy for me to teach in the university that Jesus can be treated as a Pharisee, and you can point to all sorts of ways that Jesus functions and acts and speaks, or we could say reported to speak in a way that sort of fits very well with the Pharisee approach to the Bible, the Pharisee approach to doctrine. So this is not something that I've made up at all. There are all sorts of scholarship on this issue. And there's actually a very good TikTok by Dr. Gray on this. So there you go.
all right. Well, when I start to open it up for Q&A, that's going to be something that you're going to have to circle back to now.
Excellent. I love it.
All
Thank you
right.
so much
So
for welcoming all this. I really appreciate your attitude.
yes, sir. Yes, sir. So my next question, um, now just like we were mentioning practices such as keeping the Shabbat, um, kosher foods, things of that nature. Are there practices today that Jews may be partaking in that were not given at Mount Sinai or given by Moses that we won't find in the Torah? Like
Uh,
could have been some practices that could have like
sure,
come around like the first century or something like that.
sure. I mean, the answer is yes. Um, and I would say the answer is extremely clearly yes for a scholar, for a historian to say this. So any academic scholar who looks at Judaism would clearly answer yes, that there's many practices and also beliefs within Judaism that are not found in the Hebrew Bible. That's what you're asking me, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So it's very clear from a historian standpoint. Now there are Jews, I would say, especially in the what's called the ultra Orthodox world, the less modernist Orthodox world. There are Jews who would say uh, that many of the things that a historian might say comes later, they might argue really did come out of the Torah or really did come out of that society. Um, and so there would be a dispute between, say, a religious viewpoint and a historical secular viewpoint on your question. But I can give you an example, and really almost every not okay, maybe I should be careful how to say this. Um,
No, you can be fast and loose on this channel.
okay, well, if you go to almost any American Jew who belongs to a synagogue or maybe grew up as a child, went to a synagogue, they would know that when somebody dies, you say a certain prayer called the Kaddish, Kaddish. Okay, this is a very well-known thing in Jewish culture, and there's poetry about this and dances about it and books written about it, and people know that you say this thing called the mourner's Kaddish when somebody dies. Okay, and you say it during the year of their death if you're if you're their child, or you would say it on the anniversary of their death. Everybody knows this prayer called the mourner's Kaddish. This prayer is not in the Hebrew Bible. Okay, and this prayer, is whatever. It's clearly a post biblical expression, but it's very recognizable in rabbinic Judaism. I could give you many examples, by the way, but there you go.
Yeah, you can give as many as you want.
No, no, go
And
ahead, go ahead.
I don't know how much time you got. So I'm really trying to go through some of these questions pretty
No, let's
quickly.
go through more. You're doing great. I really appreciate
Okay,
it.
cool. All right, well, no problem. Now, within our community, within our small YouTube community, and you've probably heard this too. You've probably seen some videos on TikTok. How do Jews view the apocryphal books? Let's just say, for instance, like the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, Maccabees, etc. Do you are there certain Jews who accept those as I would say writings that we should consider reading, or do some of them just totally reject them? Let's just say the Book of Enoch, for example. Let's start there.
I'm thinking about my answer. So, um, again, we're talking about rabbinic Judaism, right? So we're not dealing, for instance, about the whole Hebrew Israelite world. We're not dealing with the Messianic Jewish world, that kind of thing, right? We're
Yeah,
just talking about
not yet, not yet. Yeah,
mainstream
correct.
mainstream rabbinic Judaism. So as
Yes,
far as
sir.
I know, none of those books are considered scripture by any of the rabbinic Judaisms that I've mentioned, like Orthodox Judaism, Reform Judaism, Reconstructionist, conservative, that kind of thing. Um, I wonder if there may be some communities, like the Ethiopian Jewish community or Beta Yisrael. I wonder if maybe they have some text or scripture that I'm not thinking of. I have not really studied that group, so there may be, and there are some other groups like that. Um, So I don't. There may be some rare exceptions, but yes, if you talk about the sort of run of the mill varieties of Jews in America, for instance, none of those books are accepted as scripture. People might be curious about them, right? So an example would be the Maccabees, right? There are books of the Maccabees that tell the story of Hanukkah, which has become, it used to be really a sort of somewhat minor little holiday, but has become an important holiday in America and in the West because of Christianity. It started to put a lot of attention to Christmas. Jews started to put a lot of attention to Hanukkah. And so the book of the Maccabees, or the books of the I guess there were 4 books of the Maccabees. At least one of those is really relevant to the story of Hanukkah. But it's not scripture. It's if you look at, here's an edition of the Hebrew Bible. It's not going to have any of those books in there.
And historically, so you're saying that no historian, especially on the academic side, would accept the apocryphal books as scripture. No scholar that right. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm not speaking. A scholar like myself, we're describing what Jews do.
Yeah, correct. That's what I'm saying. Like someone within your circle.
I'm not deciding for the Jews what they do. I'm looking at the Jewish communities, and they do not accept the Book of Enoch. Now,
okay, yeah, that was basically my question. Yeah,
okay, I mean, it is true in the at the time the Book of Jubilees was written, right? There was a Jewish community that believed in the book that followed the Book of Jubilees, right? And it represented a community of people, but they were not the people who became rabbinic Jews, or at least, or I should say, if they thought Jubilees should be in the Hebrew Bible, they lost, right? So there was a canonization process where you create the biblical canon. This happened for the Jewish community. It also happened with the Christian community with the New Testament. And there was a battle. There was a fight over which books are in and which books are out, right? And so those books did not make it into the Hebrew Bible. And even some of the books that made it into the Hebrew Bible were disputed, and that dispute is recorded. So the Song of Songs, Song of Solomon, or Canticles, that book, it was disputed about whether it should be in the canon or not, and there are records in rabbinic literature about people who disputed that.
All right, yeah, good answer.
Thank you.
All right, so the next question is Isaiah 53 considered the forbidden text by Jews? Because I've heard that.
Forbidden?
Yeah, like it's and I don't know if this is a myth or I don't know how true it is. I've heard this thrown out there that Isaiah 53 was kind of like it's kind of like one of those passages that Jews kind of like ignore, or they don't know that they're not really aware of that text and what we call the Old Testament.
Okay, hold on a second. Hold on. Yeah, no, it's definitely, there's no problem with Isaiah 53. I know there's a local synagogue here where there is an effort to read every book of the Bible, every chapter of the Bible by a certain date. So they're trying to get everybody to read through the entire Hebrew Bible by a certain date. Nobody is skipping Isaiah 53, right? You go to the when you're a child and you go to Hebrew school or Jewish day school, something like that. You're learning the Bible. You learn Isaiah. Nobody's skipping Isaiah 53. Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah, and the reason why I'm asking is because I did see
no prohibition on that. Now, it's interesting. What you could have asked me is about, say, Ezekiel's vision of the chariot. Now, Ezekiel's vision of the chariot is considered a mystical text, and so there is a in rabbinic literature, there's discussion of that chariot text having mystical meanings, and that you should only be teaching those mystical meanings to certain people at certain times, right? So the plain meaning of the Ezekiel vision is very well known, and people read it in the synagogue all the time. but there are esoteric secret meanings to that apparently you should not be teaching. So in a sense, there's a prohibition on teaching the mystical meaning of certain texts, but there's nothing wrong with Isaiah 53. We just happen to read it differently than the Christian world does.
And how do you guys read Isaiah 53?
You want me to chant it for you? What do you want me to do?
No, well, what do you guys believe that the text in Isaiah 53 is actually saying? Now let's get to the steak and potatoes. Dude,
Okay, here's what I think is going to happen.
go ahead.
Okay, I don't know. I don't really want to go too far down this particular path. But I think the way I understand a lot of Christian readings of the Bible is it is based on a certain typology, right? That you're trying to read certain character types into the Hebrew Bible. That's why it's called the Old Testament. The New Testament is a clear testimony to Jesus as the Christ, and the Old Testament is a different kind of testimony to Jesus. The name Jesus never appears in the Hebrew Bible directly, but you find the type of Jesus throughout the Hebrew Bible, or throughout what you would call the Old Testament, because Jesus is the Lamb of God. So when the Passover lamb is being discussed in the Hebrew Bible, a Christian might read that story with the attaching the type of Jesus into that story. And so if Isaiah, there's a reference to a servant, that might be seen through this typological reading as the Christ, right? So, or in Daniel, there's a character in Daniel, might go, oh, well, this must represent Jesus or the Christ. So that interpretive approach, or that hermeneutic, is a Christian hermeneutic, right? So it's very different than the rabbinic readings of those texts. And I don't want to try to get into a whole debate over, how to read these texts. I mean, and also, Alton, I cannot tell you, I don't know every biblical verse, how it's been interpreted in rabbinic literature, right? I mean, I just don't have that level of encyclopedic knowledge. I would have to actually look at material to sometimes tell you that. I know some verses, but I don't know that I could sit through reading of Isaiah 53 and say, oh, this is how we read it. But it's clearly we're not using the Christological reading.
Right, and that's basically what I was asking about. I think that might be another topic for another day, because I'm pretty sure that once we get into scriptures like that, there can be quite a bit of a back and forth, because I'm already thinking of a few scriptures in the Old Testament that I can just rattle off and just say, okay, well, how do you look at this particular scripture?
Yeah.
But we're going to move on from that. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I don't know if we've ever discussed, but one of the Christian groups the main Christian group that I've studied in my work is a group called Westboro Baptist Church. They're a very controversial church, a very small group of people in Topeka. And when I approach them, I don't talk about theology. I don't get drawn into these kind of debates. But I remember one day, and I've gotten to know them over the years. I've known them for about a dozen years. And one day I remember I was sitting down with one of them, and he was like, let's talk about, Daniel. Who could this person be if not Jesus? Like, who could it possibly be? And he was so intent on trying to get me to sort of see it his way in the Christological reading of that book, right? And it was sort of almost, it was just hard for him to conceive that I could be reading the Hebrew Bible and not be attaching Jesus to it. Like, how could you possibly explain the text in any other way? And I don't think, Westboro is sort of a unusual group, but I think that sort of perspective coming from Christians is not so unusual. I've seen that in many of my evangelical students, and they're sort of befuddled, like, how is it that Jews don't realize that Jesus is in the Old Testament? So anyway, go ahead. We'll go on to the next question.
So with that question, shout out to Brother Dunamis. So with that, how do Jews view Jesus, basically? I would say you personally, but on a wider spectrum, how do Jews view Jesus?
How does one characterize the diversity of views of millions of people? Right now, we don't have we don't have hundreds of millions of people the way you have in the Christian world, the Islamic world. So if you said, how do Muslims view Jesus, that'd be even harder, right? but even, Jews do tend to argue among themselves, and they're quite diverse in their theological approaches. So again, I don't know that I can capture or generalize that whole world. I mean, I think it is pretty clear that there's no official Jewish organization, Judaism organization, that needs Jesus in its theology. You can completely explain Judaism without any reference to Jesus, right? If somebody says to me when I'm teaching college students, what's the Judaism approach to Jesus? I would just say no comment. If you're representing Judaism at a press conference and they say, well, what do you think of Jesus? You would just say no comment, just like, the president's secretary has to say. So that's the basic answer. There's no official reading. He's not considered a prophet. He's not considered a sage. He's not considered divine. He's not considered Messiah. He's not considered really anything. You could describe Judaism without Jesus. And the way I sometimes explain to my students who are Christian, many of them, most of them, imagine somebody comes to you and say, what's the Christian view of Muhammad? They go, well, there is no Christian view. We don't need Muhammad to explain Christianity. We never talk about Muhammad to explain Christianity. So you can, whether you're Amish or whether you're United Church of Christ or whether you're Methodist, Episcopalian, whatever Catholic, Roman Catholic, Ukrainian Greek Catholic, Russian Orthodox, whatever Christian you are, you do not need to explain your religion with the use of Muhammad, right?
Right. Yeah. And the thing is that, well, maybe it's just the circles that I'm in. When when the topic of Muhammad comes up, we do kind of examine some of the things that he said, some of the things that have been written, like in the Quran or the Hadith, and we'll say that, okay, these are the claims that he made about Christians and who Christ is. But when it comes to our scriptures, the Bible, we'll say, well, this what he said about Jesus, his beliefs about Jesus, conflicts with what has always been understood about who Jesus is. And that's the way that us as Christians, would approach it. And the reason why I was asking you that question was because I saw a video where it's a guy, he's in Israel, and I don't know if he considers himself to be a Jew or he's an Israelite, but he's just a guy who goes around with a camera and he's just asking people just random questions, in Israel. And I think this one particular video was like, I think it was like 1 million+ views, and he was asking people in Israel, like, who is Jesus to them? And he was asking some rabbinic Jews, he was asking, just some people who were secular, and a lot of people just gave some different answers. But the consensus basically was that Jesus was just some guy who's just started some religion and brought a lot of people out of Judaism and brought them into what is now known as Christianity.
Yeah, yeah. So again, there's a range of views. Just among Christians, for instance, there are going to be Christians who are very angry at Muhammad, who are opposed to Muhammad, who will badmouth him and say terrible things about Muhammad. And then there are other Christians who are more interfaith oriented and who will respect him and honor him and embrace Muslims and so on, right? So you're going to find the same thing in the Jewish world as well, right? So there are very important Jewish leaders going back centuries who believe that Christianity is serving a good purpose and that Islam is serving a good purpose and it's bringing people closer to God, and that happens to be their way of doing it. They didn't agree with Christianity or Islam, but they had a certain respect for it. Does that make sense? So you do have that. You do have a pretty large sector in Jewish literature that exercises respect towards Christians and Muslims, for instance, without agreeing with them, right? And nowadays, you also have a whole group of people, scholars and also Jewish religious leaders who will look at Jesus and will look at the New Testament, and they'll give you a Jewish interpretation of the New Testament. And actually, there's a book out you might be interested in. I can't think of the name of it offhand, but it's basically a Jewish commentary on the New Testament, right? And so you could look at, what does Jesus say about the Sabbath? Okay, about the observance of the Sabbath, right? And picking picking grain on the Sabbath, that kind of thing, right? So people can interpret that and place that within Jewish discourse and comment on that. So there is a wide range of Jewish views.
All right, so this next question is for the audience. Okay, now you guys listen good so we can finally put this question to rest. Do Black Jews exist? Yes or no?
Uh,
I
well,
would say people my color. Are
they,
there people my color who
certainly
are
they
Jews?
exist. Certainly they exist. I mean, the question is, there's a variety of different people who might be called a Black Jew. They might identify themselves and say, "I am a Black Jew." There are other people who you might look at, you go, and they don't say it themselves, but you might look at them and go, "Oh, that's a Black Jew," right? So there are a variety of people like that. But again, if we just talk about the conventional mainstream of rabbinic Judaism, right? There are certainly people who we would identify racially or ethnically as Black, who happen to also be members of the Jewish community, right? So I don't know. I've mentioned the Ethiopians. That's sort of an easy example. Is there a reason to think that Ethiopians are not Black?
Are you asking me that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly how you're using the word Black, but you know, Ethiopian Jews, I would say, would be identified normally as Black Jews, but maybe not. But there are certainly Black Jews in the United States. Now, I don't know that there nowadays. There's more of a term like Jews of color. You know the expression people of color, right? So there's an expression now, Jews of color, right? So that expression, Jews of color, tends to refer to people who are Black, or maybe indigenous people, who are, or maybe Latino people, who are within rabbinic Judaism. Okay. And they may be there by birth, they may be there by conversion, just like all the other people that I talked about who may be in the community by virtue of birth or by conversion.
Right, because like for instance, I've done some readings and I've done some background research about the Limba people, for instance, who are in Africa, and I think some of these people are in South Africa, and those are the ones that I was actually looking into, or I kind of did a little bit of a study on.
Okay,
They
but
say that. Go
that
ahead.
group
I'm
is,
sorry. Go ahead.
in Jewish circles, it's not, at least in my Jewish circles, it's not unusual to interrupt. Now, it is true in German Jewish circles, people do not interrupt as much. So I hope you don't mind me interrupting you. But that African group, Lembe, is that how I'm pronouncing it?
Limba, Lemba.
Limba. So that
Yes, sir.
group, that I think there's more dispute over their identity and whether they are accepted as rabbinic Jews. I think there's more dispute over that. But what I'm talking about is you go to an Orthodox synagogue, you go to a Hasidic synagogue, you go to a Reform synagogue. The synagogue I went to in Chicago, that I happened to attend in Chicago, there were African Americans who were full members of that synagogue, so you could call them Black Jews. And I never asked them, "Do you call yourself a Black Jew?" But presumably they would feel comfortable with that phrase.
All right. So yeah, you basically answered my question. So
Eh,
yes, for everybody who missed, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What was her name? Karen Lewis. She passed away, right? Karen Lewis passed away a few years ago. She was, I think, she was the head of the Chicago Teachers Union at one point. She was a labor union. She was a teacher in the public schools in Chicago, and she was a labor union leader and organizer. And she also happened to be Jewish, and she would go to the same synagogue occasionally that I would go to occasionally. And she was very respected there, and so on. So again, I never asked Karen, "Are you a Black Jew?" but but she was clearly African American and clearly Jewish.
All right. So, and the reason why I asked that question was because, there's some people within our small YouTube community. They say that people like myself and others have denied that there is such thing as a person being black and being a Jew. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there to let everyone know that that's not my position, and we do have a Jewish scholar here who is affirming that there are black people who are Jews. So that is the reason why I asked you that question.
Okay,
Um,
super.
all right, so yeah, so I got one last question, and the reason why I'm trying to cut my question short because I do want to get some other people on before we go ahead and let you go. Uh oh, actually, I have two questions. This one here. Now, you just did a video concerning Deuteronomy 28:68. Now, historically, has that scripture been understood to be a future prophecy, especially for those who have been affected by the transatlantic slave trade? Anytime in history, has anyone read that scripture and come to the conclusion that this could be a prophecy for something that was to take place in the future, whether it's the transatlantic slave trade or not?
Yeah, so that section is known as sort of a section of curses. Uh, there's a section in Leviticus that is similar towards the end of the book of Leviticus in the parsha called Bechukotai. I don't remember the exact chapter it is, but it's toward the end of Leviticus, which is known as a tochacha or a rebuke. And I believe that the section in Deuteronomy that you're talking about was also known as a kind of a rebuke to the people. Like, you'll have blessings if you observe the law and observe my teachings and my commandments, says the Lord, kind of thing. And if you don't do that, God says you'll have these terrible things happen to you. So yes, I don't know if the word prophecy is exactly the right word. It's a I think the traditional reading would be it's a warning, or it's a uh, it's like a caution. Like, God, the God of the Bible is the God of reward and punishment. So you'll be punished if you are sinning. So I don't know that. Yeah, so I don't know that it wouldn't be unusual for people to consider it a kind of prophecy, but I don't think it's really categorized as a prophecy the way Ezekiel or Elijah might be categorized as prophets in their own way.
Right. Well, it's like for instance, if you were to ask a rabbinic Jew about Deuteronomy 28:68, what they look at, then what they look at that particular text and say that this could still apply to them somehow in the future, or this could have already been fulfilled, like for instance during something like the Holocaust. Could they read something like that and say, well, because we sinned against the most high God, this is what has happened to us, or this is something that will happen to us, with slave ships and all of that type of stuff?
Yes, yes, I do think there would be. I don't think it's a very common thing to be talked about, frankly, but I do think you could find people who write about, say, the Shoah or the Holocaust, and they could say these would be, you know, pretty religious Jews who take the Bible pretty seriously. They could say, yeah, the Holocaust might be understood as a period of punishment or suffering, and it might be reflected in this section of the Bible, or this section of the five books of Moses, like in Leviticus or Deuteronomy. That, yeah, it makes, that we can understand this kind of suffering because it represents our sinning. I think that's sort of what you're asking me. I don't know. I don't know that I've ever heard anybody say that this is the complete fulfillment of it, and that's the end of the story. I don't know that they would say that. They might say, well, it's an ongoing warning. I would suspect they would say that we're not in a messianic period, and so if Jews were to continue to sin, that kind of viewpoint might be that the curses would continue to apply.
Now, do you see that particular text being used to talk about the transatlantic slave trade, or to try to say that this verse applies to the transatlantic slave trade? Do you see that as problematic, or do you see that as something that could be justified?
You know, as a scholar, that's not how I approach things. I don't try to figure out if somebody's interpretation is right or wrong or good or bad or justified or unjustified or valid or invalid. That's not what I'm doing. I just love learning about people. I try to maintain a high level of curiosity about religion, just like a biologist hopefully is interested in biology. So I'm very interested in different religious cultures. And so if there's a religious culture that interprets the Bible this way, I find it interesting. I'd love to learn more about it. To me, I'm not in the world of judging whether it's right or wrong, or it's not a problem for me as a scholar. It's an exciting thing for me as a scholar. I do understand why many rabbinic Jews would consider it a problem.
Okay, good. Yeah, and that's actually what I wanted to. This is one of the reasons why I was asking that, because as even based on your own video, that this is something that has come up, especially within the Black community, the rendering of that particular verse, and I just wanted to know, do scholars actually look at that particular verse and say that, hey, this could be rendered correctly, or this could apply to the transatlantic slave trade, or
People,
that?
people who are scholars in my position, we are not telling you whether it's correct or not. I
Okay, that's
Judaism,
interesting.
I study Judaism, but I never say, oh, Reform Judaism is correct and Orthodox is incorrect. I never say that. If I do, I've misspoken. I would regret it. I would apologize. I would take back my words. So I would not want to be saying, oh, the Hebrew Israelites or the Hebrew Pentecostals, that they are correct or incorrect. That's not what I'm saying. In fact, I can tell you definitively that there are people who are rabbinic Jew. Well, okay, maybe I haven't spoken to them personally, but I believe that there are people who are rabbinic Jews who believe this, right? Because we do have, for instance, Capers Funya, right? He's the chief rabbi of the International Israelite Rabbinical Council or something like that, right? And so he is also accepted as a rabbinic Jew by some sector of the rabbinic Jewish community. So he's a boundary crossing person. Okay, so he may very well read Deuteronomy 28:68 or that whole chapter in relation to the transatlantic slave trade, and he can also fit very well within to rabbinic Judaism. So he would be an example of somebody who would be accepted to have that kind of reading. But I'm not telling you whether it's correct or incorrect. That's not my role.
Well, all right. Well, listen, you guys heard it. You guys heard it from a scholar. All right, so we do got a couple people right now who are in the back, and they wanted to ask you a couple of questions. And I do want to remind everyone that if you guys are brought on, try to keep your question to about a minute or so. So Dr. Gray could be able to hear the question. He can give a response, and then if you have a follow-up question pertaining to that particular question to kind of get clarity, or a statement to kind of get some clarity, then we're going to try to keep this as short as possible. So therefore, we can get some other people on as well. The first person that we have so far is Rashard D. Thank you, sir. Go ahead and come to the mic and ask your question whenever you're
Yeah.
ready.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right. Yeah, Mr. Gray, do you have your Bible in front of you?
I do.
Okay. Can you go to Genesis chapter 1
Okay.
and verse 26? All right. So you can read, if you can just read at least the first half of it. My question is outside of Christianity, but in Judaism, what do y'all consider the us and the our? When you can, and like I said, can you just read the first half of it at least, so that the rest of the chat would know what we're talking about? I mean, they can look at it.
You're talking about chapter 1, verse 26?
Yes, sir.
So it says, Vayomer Elokim na'aseh Adam b'tzalmenu kidmutenu, v'yirdu v'gad hayam, uva'ov hashamayim, uva'v'hema, uv'chol ha'aretz, uv'chol haremes haromes al ha'aretz.
Oh,
Okay, so it says Elokim, meaning, a certain name of God says, let us make man in our image. That would be sort of, in our image and in our, anyway, it's saying in our image sort of twice with two slightly different words. In our form, maybe in our image. I'm not sure how the English translates it.
Yeah, it
But
would say in our likeness in the English translation.
Great. So there's a common question. Why does the verse say na'aseh? Why does it say we will make, right? Because that is a grammatical construction, first person plural. You would expect a first person singular if it's God speaking. That's what you're asking me about, right?
Well, what I'm asking you is, who do y'all consider the us and the our? That's the main part.
Right. So I think a typical rabbinic reading in rabbinic Judaism, a typical commentary would say that God is speaking to the celestial court. So there might be a notion of celestial angels or celestial beings, and that God is saying to those beings, let us go ahead and create humanity. And this sort of lines up with the angelology of the ancient Israelite culture, which believed in angels and believed that God's actions in the world were done partly through sending out angels. Some of the discourse is about as if angels could only have like one function. And I don't know if they were all, so there are debates within angelology of how that was done. But, so you can imagine if God is about to try to get something done, God is doing it by sending out entities that are doing that. So I think that's a common rabbinic interpretation. Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah, and this is my last question. I'm gonna get off. But the thing that I was kind of wondering from the perspective of Judaism is, considering who can create. Obviously, the angels were created. That's why I was curious who is thought of as us, because angels, obviously they are created beings. So I'll get off and let you go.
Yeah. So that's fine.
All right,
So
thank
yes.
you, sir.
So yeah, any angels would have been created if there's such thing as angels in Jewish thought. They would all be created by God. So Jewish thought is very into the notion of there being just one single God who is the creator. Anything else flows from that. It's considered a Jewish heresy to believe, for instance, that there's one God who creates the good and one God creates the evil. The notion of two powers, that would be a heresy within normative Judaism.
All right, Brother Keith, how you doing, sir?
Yeah, I'm well. Good to see you again, Dr. Gray.
Yes,
Good to
sir.
see you. How are you?
I got a question. You were talking about there was a set of Jews who followed Jubilees. I was curious to know, since they weren't rabbinic, can you identify who they were?
I can't. I don't really know much about that.
Okay.
And as far as I know, I've never read anything that really was able to clearly identify a community. I don't know that we know much more than some of these texts like Jubilees. I do have a resource here. It's called, it probably shows it backwards in your screen there. Jewish Literature Between the Bible and the Mishnah. It's by a scholar named George Nicholsberg, who doesn't happen to be Jewish, but it covers a lot of that kind of literature. But if memory serves correctly, weren't the people in Jubilees holding by a solar calendar?
Yes, I
Right.
think they were.
So there was a whole dispute in the Jewish world, or again, maybe the word Jewish is anachronistic. In the Judean world, in the Israelite culture, there was a dispute over which calendar to hold by. Now, Rabbinic Judaism went with the lunar calendar, but before that was all decided on, there were disputes about it.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
That's it.
That's it. All right.
Great to see you.
Man. Good to see you.
All right, Raphael, you're on.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Yes,
Great
sir.
to
I
see you.
already know who you are. So let's
Hello,
go ahead
can
and
you
get
hear
the
me?
question. Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Yes, sir. Okay. So I wanted to ask the gentleman here, what his thought was on. I have two chief rabbis here. I'm sure you might know of them, Yitzhak Yosef and David Lau. And I wanted to ask you, as a historian, the Messiah is still on the way?
Okay, the question is, for those chief rabbis, do they believe that the Messiah is still on the way? Is that your question?
Raphael, you muted.
Sure, I clarify the question. Raphael is muted there, so. Alton, did I understand the question correctly?
I'm trying to figure out what he was what he was asking as well. Oh, here he is. Can you go ahead and clarify your
Yes,
question,
that is my
Raphael?
question. Sorry, there's going to be a delay. I apologize for that.
No problem. I think that's a fine question. So those two chief rabbis represent two what we might think of as ethnic communities, right? There's the Ashkenazi chief rabbi and there's the Sephardi chief rabbi. These are rabbis who have official roles within the Israeli.
Yeah, sorry, there's a little bit of delay. I do apologize, but yes, that's exactly what I'm asking.
Okay, so these are rabbis who have official positions within the Israeli government. They are not necessarily the best rabbis or the most respected rabbis, but there is a certain amount of respect for them, of course. But they do not believe that they do not believe certainly that they themselves are the Messiah, and so they would be, according to their doctrine and beliefs, they would believe that the Messiah will someday come, and they would say, "May he come speedily in our day." That would be a typical thing that they would say, that they would pray for the coming of the Messiah to be soon and before there's more suffering.
Okay, so my last thing is this. If you could give me their understanding on if these things have been fulfilled. The first passage will be Numbers, the book of Numbers in the Torah, chapter 24, verse 17 down to 20. And if you could identify these nations today, that would be great.
All right, so yeah, we're gonna have to have you have him address that last question, and then we're just gonna have to move on because we got a couple more people got some questions as well. So you want him to identify who the nations are. So we're gonna go ahead and have him do that real quick, and then we're gonna go ahead and bring someone else on.
Okay, so I think what you might be most interested in is Edom, but in rabbinic circles, probably what's most interesting to them is Amalek, which is on verse 20. And the reason why that's such an important group is because that is a group that is considered like an eternal enemy of the Jewish people. And I believe that those rabbis would hold that those people cannot be identified, that it is that they have dispersed, that there is no single people who should be identified as that enemy, and that they would probably say that it is improper for people in their community to identify people as Amalek. So that gets partly an answer, but that would probably be the most explosive or inflammatory part of the verses that you mentioned, is the identity of the tribe Amalek, which is considered an enemy. Edom, I don't know that you asked something like, has it been fulfilled? Is that what he said? Or
yeah, I think that what he's trying to do is he's trying to see who are those particular people. Hold on one second. Yeah, that's what it sounds like, that he's trying to get you to identify who those people are, and he's probably asking who are those people today. That's probably what he's trying to get at.
I don't know these particular rabbis' discourse, or there is Rabbi Yosef is part of a whole world of people who have discourse, and they're going to have commentaries on the Bible. And, they may talk about Edom in a kind of symbolic way or a kind of homiletical way in their sermons and so on. But I don't think there's any sort of clear doctrine that would require them to identify any particular group that way, or to even say that a group needs to be identified. Now, it is true in rabbinic literature from the early medieval period, Edom was used to represent the Roman Empire. So Edom was sometimes used in rabbinic literature as a symbol or metonym for the Roman enemy. But I don't think Edom is really necessarily used that much afterwards the same way. But I could be wrong. It could very well be used in Jewish homiletics or Jewish sermons.
All right, we got a question from Roger Sherman. He says, how do you see Genesis 6? Do you believe that they were real giants?
Okay. Again, the formulation of the question is a little bit sort of past me, because it's not about what I believe. But I would say there are many people in the Jewish world who do not believe in the literal readings of many texts in the Hebrew Bible, and that they would have a more modernist reading, and they would not necessarily believe that those are literal supernatural giants or supernatural beings. And then there may be other people in the Jewish world who do take what we think of as maybe a more literalist reading of the Hebrew Bible, and they may see miracles and giants and mythological creatures. They may take that to be quote unquote real. So I'm not telling you my beliefs. I'm trying to describe the range of belief within the different Judaisms that exist.
All right, Jermaine, go ahead.
Hey, how you doing, Alton? How you doing,
man,
Professor? Yeah, my question to you, Professor, is in a different. Can you hear me?
Well, hold on a second. I thought we were not going to have a religious debate, but I see you wearing a New York Yankees hat.
Well, no, I'm not actually a Yankees fan. I'm actually a Cincinnati fan, to be honest with you. I'm in Ohio as well.
Yeah, he's in Ohio as well.
Yeah, so
you guys are neighbors.
Yeah, I'm not really a Yankees fan. I just thought the hat looked good. That's all.
I do not like the Cincinnati team at all. I think one of the few times I went to a World Series, they beat us.
Yeah. Well, that had been a long time ago then, right? But my question for you is, you're talking about the guy asked you the question about the Mashiach's return, right? So my question is, within the different thoughts, Jewish thoughts, what does that look like when the Mashiach returns? When the Mashiach comes, not returns, but comes. What does that look like in the different Jewish thoughts?
Excellent question. So there are different Jewish views on this, and two of the main views might be categorized, or sets of views, you might say, might be those that are more rationalist and those that are more mystical. Okay, so the more rationalist view would be that the Mashiach, or the Messiah, Messiah means, as you sounds like means the anointed one. So just like Samuel the prophet anointed David to become King David, the notion is that the Messiah would be anointed, maybe with oil, I don't know how it's done, to become a new sovereign for a restored Jewish kingdom. So the rationalist understanding is that there'll be a human being who is a guy from the Davidic lineage, and he will restore the Jewish kingdom and sit on a throne, so to speak. The more mystical view would be that there's supernatural happenings and things that are sort of beyond human understanding, and maybe ushering in a time of what we might think of as utopian kind of peace and well-being, and maybe a period of all sorts of miracles of various types. And there are many schools of Jewish mysticism. I don't know many schools, but there are various strands within Jewish mysticism. So I couldn't even begin to, and I don't necessarily know enough to look at all the different mystical readings of the Messiah. Now, there's a third category that I would say, which is, especially in the non-Orthodox world, that reads the Messiah as a symbolic term, or the Messianic as a symbolic term, and that they believe that they should be active towards peace and justice in the world, and that the more they bring on peace and justice in the world, the more that they bring on a kind of messianic period. So those are sort of three ways of reading it within Judaism. Is that helpful to you?
Well, yes, sir. Yes, sir. I guess this is my last question, Alton. I'll get off. What is you mentioned the first one was the Jewish kingdom. What would that look like?
I mean, you have very little about the Jewish kingdom in biblical literature, but in rabbinic literature, you do have some discussions about the governance by the Jewish king and the relationship of the Jewish king to the Jewish people and to the Jewish, the priesthood. Oh, I'm sorry. The temple would also be restored during the time of a Messiah or a Messianic era. And so you would have a restoration of the priesthood. And the rabbis believe that they themselves would continue to play a role. And so, for instance, there are governance rules that the king would be subject to. And, there are questions in rabbinic law, like how do you deal with a king who makes an error? How do you deal with a king who does a certain kind of sin? What does the king need to do for repentance? What happens when somebody in the king's family dies? Does the king observe the same mourning practices? So there's all sorts of, not enormous amounts, but a certain amount of discussion in rabbinic literature about what would life be under a Jewish king. Some of those discussions are about the past, but some of those are prospective if or when there would be a Messiah for them. I'm hoping that was helpful to him.
Yeah, I think that's what our brother Jermaine was getting at, because I know he asks those types of questions all the time, or he basically bring those up in conversations. We have another question from Mr. Chris. He says, "What is your thoughts on Chabad messianism?" Okay, so Alton, we're going to have to work on your pronunciation here. Can you say ch?
Huh.
Chabad. Is a D.
Chabad.
Chabad with a D at the end. Okay.
Chabad. Okay. Kind of clear my throat a little bit,
Yeah, we'll work on it. Next time we meet, we'll get it.
Yes, sir.
So Chabad is just for people who aren't familiar, Chabad is a branch of the Hasidic movement. The Hasidic movement has various sort of dynasties within it, and the Chabad group comes out of a group called Lubavitcher Hasidism, and they have a certain family sort of dynastic leadership. Anyway, so Chabad messianism is really an interesting phenomenon in Judaism. In some ways, it's very, very much within the Hasidic world, a certain understanding of the importance of the coming of the Messiah, a lot of devotional attention to that. And so in some ways, the theology behind Chabad messianism is not unusual for that sector of Judaism. What is unusual is that when their Rebbe, their leader, passed away in the 1980s, there was no replacement. And leading up to the time of his death, many people were thinking that he would be the Messiah. Many people, within their movement, was identifying him as the Messiah. I don't know exactly how unusual that is within Hasidism, but what was unusual was after he died, people continued to say that he is the Messiah or will be this Messiah. There was questions about whether did he actually die or was his death some kind of suspension until he comes back to be resurrected. So even before I could possibly give any thoughts about Chabad messianism, I just feel I need to explain a little bit about what it's about. What do I want to say about it? I mean, I think it's an unusual phenomenon within the Jewish world, as is Chabad, even without its messianism. It's a very, pretty popular, powerful organization, and they do enormous amount of outreach throughout the Jewish world. But they are also very controversial, especially because of their messianism. And in my neighborhood, you have people who are very strongly Chabad messianists, who are members of Chabad and very strongly believing that their Rebbe who passed away is the Messiah and will come back. And then you have, they might say, if you actually cornered them, they may not say he is the Messiah. They might say, from all we can tell, he is the Messiah, or they might qualify it slightly. But then in my same neighborhood, you have ultra-Orthodox Jews who, at least privately, would say that this is really an unacceptable belief and that they should not be approaching messianism in that way. There's also modern Orthodox Jews who believe that is inappropriate the way they approach their messianism. And there's I believe, an Orthodox Jewish scholar who has written a book about disputing their form of messianism. So it's a very controversial issue within Jewish circles. I don't know that it's really ever come to a that big a conflict, but it's certainly something that people disagree with at a very sort of foundational level of doctrine. And many Jews sort of assume that you couldn't possibly have somebody who died to become the Jewish Messiah. But I believe Chabad has found sources that support the possibility of that occasion, that their Rebbe died but could come back. And of course, physical resurrection of the dead is a long-standing fundamental belief in traditionalist rabbinic doctrine. So I'm hoping these thoughts are somewhat of an answer to your question. I don't have a personal opinion on it that, like I said, that I'm expressing, but I hope I'm describing how controversial that issue is within the Jewish world.
Yeah, just let me know at any time how many more questions that you're willing to take, because I do see a few of them have come in. So let's go ahead and go to the next one. This is from Mrs. Berean Babes, Sister Violent. She says, question, do you believe Daniel 9 of 70 weeks prophecy was fulfilled in the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, or how is this viewed in the historical or in the world of historians?
Yeah, well, historians don't judge biblical prophecies, right? So, I actually don't know that much about rabbinic literature on this question, so I think I'll just pass. But yeah, it's not a question of my belief. And again, as a secular historian, we would never judge whether a prophecy is true or false or fulfilled or not. Sorry, I can't do more with that.
Charles Jordan asks, he says, ask him what happened to the Idumeans.
Yeah, that is a good question. I would love to learn about that. Again, it's not my area, but they were a group of people that I believe were, many of them were brought into Judaism, and at different times there were controversies over their lineage. And if I'm not mistaken, okay, I guess I should be careful what I say on YouTube because I don't want to be mistaken. But I will say that the whole notion of disputing somebody's lineage is frowned upon in rabbinic literature. So there are people who dispute people's lineage in Jewish circles, ancient and current, but they tend to be criticized pretty harshly, right? So if somebody says, the Idumeans, some of them became Jews, you should just leave it at that. You shouldn't be denouncing them for that. So, but in terms of their actual history and what happened to that community, I really would love to learn. I don't know.
All right, Brother Dunamis.
Shalom. Grace and peace. Hey, Dr. Gray, I saw your message on the call Sunday. I was gonna respond. This past Sunday, I was just feeling a little sick, so that's why I didn't jump on the call.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah, but I'm gonna send some feedback for the video you put up. So my question is, in regards to luminaries, right? The sun, moon, and stars. In ancient Israel, going on to like Second Temple, how important were they in terms of like keeping time in the calendar? Also in regards to like prophecy. Do luminaries play an important role? Are they mentioned in different Jewish thoughts or not so much?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, I think the moon is very important.
Yeah.
Right. So about the moon, but you're asking me about stars other than what back in those days. I don't know how much I guess they did know the moon. They obviously knew the moon was the moon, but you're asking me about stars, not the moon, right?
The moon more. It could be the moon. Well, let me.
The moon. The moon was very important in rabbinic literature because that's how you determine the beginning of the month, and the timing of all the festivals. And a lot of other aspects of the liturgical calendar all depend on the timing of the months. And the way the rabbinic lunar calendar was set up, it took several centuries, but the way it was set up was you have a leap month instead of a leap, the equivalent of in the solar calendar, you have like a leap day or something every 4 years, they say. So I've heard. Mm-hmm. But in the rabbinic lunar calendar, every 19 years there's a cycle. And every so often within those years, you have an addition of a single month. So in that sense, it's very important.
So with that, does the Jewish month start with the crescent moon or the full moon? And I just have one follow-up question, Alan.
You're helping me on this one. Crescent. It's the crescent, like the moon. And then when you first see the crescent, that's the beginning of the new month, right? And in fact, when you have in the old days, you had to come and you had to get people to testify that they saw the beginning of the moon, right? And there's a story they would interrogate the witnesses, and if the witnesses described the crescent in the wrong way, then that they hadn't actually seen it because obviously the early crescent moon is really only shaped in one direction every month. Is this what you're asking?
Yeah. Because the reason I'm bringing it up, we've had some discussions about the calendars and luminaries. So just trying to get a feel for the importance and for like prophecy, and like more so dealing with Hillel and going from using the moon to more using a calculated calendar. Is that still, are there groups today in modern Judaism that want to revert back to the luminaries using the moon? Or is a calculated calendar good enough in terms of keeping the feast days and keeping the times and the seasons? I don't know if that.
Yeah, I think I was reading somewhere. Was it the Karaite Jews who are they're not rabbinic Jews? There may be some very unusual communities that are trying to. Oh, maybe there are Hebrew Israelites like this too, who are interested in using the actual phases of the moon or sightings of the moon from Jerusalem or the land of Israel or something like this. But in the sort of the mainstream Jewish world of Orthodoxy, Reform, Conservative, they all go by the calculated calendar. They're not basing it on sightings. It sounds like you already know that, though.
Well, no. Well, we've had discussions and we've heard both views. Some people present it's the full moon's a new month, and we got to keep to the moon, the cycles, things of that nature. And the calculated system is wrong, and Hillel was forced to do it by Constantine, things of that nature. Not so much about the Constantine part, but in terms of how Professor Gray, shaking your head.
Well, no, there's somebody who happens to be in my household here who's going to stay off camera, who happens to he really loves the calendar and is very interested in this much more than me. But I do
Okay.
want to say, I don't think this is an issue of debate in the Jewish world. Now, maybe there's some small group somewhere or unusual people who are thinking about it differently. But as far as I know, the entire Jewish world is pretty much in sync based on that calculated calendar. And the major difference is that I can think of is between Jews who live in Israel today and Jews who live in a place like the United States or Europe or Asia or someplace like that, Africa, people who are away from it. So the people in Israel do celebrate it a little bit differently. And so in the diaspora, the people outside of Israel, they have 2 days of holidays. So, this is way too complicated to explain right now. But anyway, Passover has an extra day. The holiday of Sukkot has an extra day. The holiday of the Feast of Weeks, which is coming up in a few days, they have an extra day. So because of that difference between Israel and the diaspora, the liturgical readings of the Hebrew Bible are a little bit different in the synagogue. And so they're a little bit out of sync. But everybody knows about this. It's all calculated. I don't know of any Jewish group that is disputing this. But, we're an argumentative people. We love argument. So there might be somebody out there. I'm just not thinking of them.
Okay. Hey, can I ask one quick question out and one more? And then
Here you go.
In terms, so this is tied to the luminaries because in Genesis it talks about they're tied to the times and the seasons, and it's tied to the Shabbat. So if the whole world uses the sun, moon, and stars, was Hashem's design for Shabbat to be for all people from creation with the seventh day, or it's more so inclined from Mount Sinai for the Hebrews, the Israelites at the time, than for the Jewish people? If that makes sense.
I just want to reflect back that you're asking me to describe God's intent.
Oh, you're right. Right. Well, more so in Jewish thought, in terms of interpreting the Shabbat. Let me have that caveat on there so I'm safe.
I would say I've never heard any Jews, I can't think of any Jewish objection to the world having a 7-day week and to having a day of rest. So, I've never heard any objections to that. If the whole world had a 10-day calendar, like, I don't know, was that the French Revolution or something?
Yeah.
I don't know. Jews would really care. They would stick maybe to their 7-day calendar. It would be a pain in the tuchus to have to do that. But I don't know that there are any objections to that. However, it is true that in rabbinic discussions, they're not trying to get the non-Jews to observe the Sabbath the same way.
Okay.
So the Sabbath prohibitions, like you're not supposed to light a fire on the Sabbath, and all the many associated laws considered 39 sabbatical Sabbath work prohibitions. They're not interested in trying to get the Gentiles to observe those laws. So a rabbi, an Orthodox rabbi, for instance, or maybe even other rabbis, wouldn't go around to non-Jews and say, "Oh, you should be observing the Sabbath the way that we do." That's really not a thing.
Okay, that's probably more tied to like more Christian, evangelistic thought, maybe more so.
Yeah, I mean, if Christians want to go ahead and do that, well, the truth is, from what I can tell on TikTok, some Jews might object if Christians started observing the Sabbath the way the Jews do. But we certainly know that within the various Christianities out there, there are many of them that have for centuries been interested in Sabbath observance, right?
Okay.
So there are Sabbatarians, I think maybe a term that can be used.
Yeah.
That's a long and a long-standing tradition within certain Christian circles. they don't do it necessarily the way that Judaism has done it, but
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense.
yeah, great questions.
All right, thank you so much. So, so the Professor Gray, last one, slide one in. If I were to start doing orthopraxy, start going to synagogue, I'm going to a Jewish community, and I don't say anything. They say, "Oh, he must be Ethiopian." We're not sure. Would I be accepted inside the community, or I would just be seen like a stranger?
Dunamis, why don't you come visit my family for a Sabbath in Cincinnati, and
Okay.
you can come over to our house and have dinner with us, and you can walk to the synagogue. There are 4 Orthodox synagogues in my neighborhood. You can one of this Chabad, whatever. You can choose the ones you want, and we'll walk there, and we could test out how people receive you.
Oh, okay. So we'll do like a hidden camera to where.
Why get it hypothetical? I mean, why not see what it's really like? I mean,
Okay.
I mean, again, I don't know exactly where
you came and took over the show.
I don't mean to, but I'm actually excited. That'll be interesting to see a little test, hypothesis, how well it received. I can just document the process, and we can go from there.
Yeah, because I mean, look, there are a couple issues. One is that you're African American, right? And so people might respond to that in welcoming ways. They might respond to that with what are sometimes called microaggressions, which is sort of like, rumblings of, prejudicial stereotypes and stuff. So there's the racial aspect of it, and then there's the aspect of you being a Christian, or to the extent that you're going to admit to being a Christian. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, because if they don't know, if they don't ask, when in Rome, as we would say. So I'll just say, look, what you do, I'll do.
But let me ask you a question, right? Like, if I'm wearing my skull cap and I go to a church, right? Most churches would I think I would feel very comfortable. Many churches would just completely welcome me, right? But if I go up while they're doing communion and I want to take communion, many people would look at me in an odd way. They would think it's not appropriate for me to take communion. Or if I happen to be President Biden, or what's her name, Nancy Pelosi, I don't entirely look like Nancy Pelosi, but if I'm Nancy Pelosi and I want to take communion, they might reject that, right? So, so when you go to the synagogue, yeah, you can sit with me, but when it comes to being given certain kinds of roles, they're not going to give you a role if they don't think you're Jewish.
Okay, so like what? Because this is interesting. What kind of roles would that kind of be like?
Well, I think there are probably like
Dunamis, we're way over the limit.
I know. I didn't read into it. He's trying to draw me to the. I'm interested. Yeah, because we'll talk. We'll talk. We got to talk offline. So, what kind of roles would they say yes or no, or we're not too sure?
Alton, you need to decide whether you want to go on to somebody else, or whether you want me to answer.
Yeah, it's your show, Alan, so we don't want to take over.
All right. We can say that for Sunday.
Yeah.
Because I got 3 more questions. I got 3 more people that's waiting, and I'm gonna go ahead and ask these last 3 questions because I'm starting to get hungry as well, and I'm ready to eat. Plus the game on, so man,
All right. Thank you for the time.
The game, man. Appreciate you, Dunamis.
Yeah, Dunamis, it's great to see you, or not see you.
Okay, let me see. Oh, this is the one that and you can answer this however you want. If you want to pass this, that'll be fine too. But Robert M says, with many passages that show Jesus Christ in opposition to the Pharisees, John 8, for example, why would anyone say Jesus was a Pharisee? And that is in response to what you were saying earlier about Jesus being a Pharisee. Or being viewed as a Pharisee.
Sure. Freud talks about the narcissism of small differences. And if you're familiar with that phrase, it has to do with the notion that you sometimes argue with the people who you're closest to, right? And so you might have an argument at the family table about who passes the salt, or where is the salt shaker put on the table, or how do you peel the garlic? Some people peel the garlic this way, some people peel the garlic that way. And so some of the people we have the most arguments with and the most conflicts with are the people we're close to, say in our own family. So with that background, okay, the fact that Jesus is portrayed in the Gospels as arguing with the Pharisees might just mean that he's among his own group and he's fighting with them. He's arguing with them, and the Pharisees, we're constantly arguing with each other, not in the New Testament, but in rabbinic literature, the Pharisees are always arguing with each other and disputing things, and they have long-standing disputes that go on for generations, and they talk about hitting each other, if not killing each other. So the fact that Jesus is described as so oppositional to the Pharisees doesn't mean he's not one of them. It might mean those are the people he really cares about. Those are the people he wants to persuade. And to say a little bit more about this, if you look at Jesus's reasoning, or the way that his reasoning is reported, especially in the Synoptic Gospels, he's using a kind of biblical interpretation that is very familiar to somebody like myself who reads rabbinic literature. It looks like, in many cases, that Jesus is using rabbinic forms of hermeneutics or of interpretation. And so he's doing it in a way that would not have been done by the other Judean sects. So he's not a Sadducee, he's not an Essene, he's really using Pharisaic kind of reasoning. There's more to be said about this, but that's a start. What's your view on the historical writings of Josephus? Well, they're very valuable because we don't have lots of historical writings like Josephus. I think many, many scholars wish we had 50 different books like Josephus, and then we could compare them and see who had the best descriptions, who seemed the most reliable, see where the consensus was. Of course, we wish we had more archaeological or historical records that could be used to corroborate some of his statements. But it is true that in a lot of scholarship, people do use Josephus as a moderately reliable source. So I don't know if that's exactly what you're asking me, but yeah, Josephus is taken to be a fairly serious effort at historical writing, or what we now look back upon as a kind of historical writing. So yeah, I have a copy of Josephus's works actually in my other room here. So it's not to say that everything he said was correct. Okay, keep going.
All right, so this is the last question. This is like pure wool. Yes, come to the microphone. We can hear you.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we're gonna go ahead and let that guy. He was already on, and he's trying to come in and mask his voice. He's yeah. Okay. Hold up. All right. Yeah, sorry about that. Not that particular guy. He's kind of like a troll. He actually came on earlier. I think he was asking something about. I think he was trying to lead you to the Numbers passage, asking who the people are. He's trying to come back in under another screen name, and he's trying to use another voice. And I thought that's who that was, and I was correct. So I just went ahead and kicked him off. Because he'll come on, he'll ask a question, then he'll come on and try to mask his voice, and then ask another question, and then yeah, it's no, that's just the end of that. All right, so Professor Gray, I want to thank you for coming on. I'm going to see if there's another question that may have popped up. Let me see. That maybe you can. I think that's about it.
Okay.
I think yeah. Hold on, let me see. Okay, well, Jordan has one more question, and I know that this comes up a lot during our discussions. Jordan asks, ask him how he feels about Luke 21:24 and Ezekiel 36. So I guess he's trying to make a parallel between those two. And I think that this is a reference to the people in 1948. Jordan, let me know if that is what your reference is, or is that the reason why you're bringing that up?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's not a question of whether I have feelings about these things. I think some of these questions are like, do I agree or do I disagree with certain kinds of biblical commentaries or biblical readings, biblical interpretations, and that's not what I do. I mean, I don't judge these things. So, I can give you some uh, rabbinic commentaries on Ezekiel 36 or something. We could talk. Or maybe I could investigate and research for you what's the history of the interpretation of these passages, and what are the different lines of thought where the disagreements um, come up. Luke, of course, is from the New Testament, so Judaism is not going to be commenting in general on any passage in the New Testament. So, if you're asking me what do various Jewish thinkers think, they're mostly not discussing any of the Gospels.
All right,
So
well, that's fair.
I'm sorry if the last question falls flat a little bit, but again, I'm trying to be here, speak as a scholar. I'm not trying to represent my own religious views, which, whatever they are, they're going to be just one narrow slice of what's a very diverse Jewish world.
Yeah, and I think you did a pretty good job answering questions, more based on what scholars or what is understood within the Jewish culture or the Jewish religion or Jewish beliefs pertaining to some of the questions that some of us has asked. And I'm glad that you were able to come on, and I'm glad that you were willing to come on and just really clear a lot of these things up. I really, really thank you for your time. Let me see. Okay.
We'll do
Um,
me a favor and save the chat so that we can go back and look for and see what other kind of questions and comments people have. I'd love to have a copy of the chat, but I just thank you for having me on. It's a lot of fun getting to know you better, hearing all your questions. You had an amazing array of intelligent and very appropriate questions, and it's great to see the kind of community that you're building. As you know, I don't endorse you. I don't endorse any of your religious beliefs. I don't condemn any of your religious beliefs. But as a person, it's nice to get to know you. And I really appreciate you coming on. And I appreciate the whole range of people that apparently are listening. And I can't really tell, but it's great to be here. So thank you.
yes, sir. Yes, sir. How can people get in contact with you? Well, I know you mentioned TikTok. Is there any? Well, first of all, what is your name on TikTok so people can go and start to check out some of your content?
It's at Prof Gray, PROFGRAY, all one word on TikTok. I do have a YouTube channel, and I can try to. Well, it's a YouTube channel on a particular project. It's not. I don't have a general YouTube channel, but I could give you that. And I do have. I'm on Twitter, so I'm not very active on Twitter right now, but people can contact me through Twitter as well. So yeah, it'd be great. It'd be great to have more people contact me through Twitter. I guess that's where I'm most active. I mean, I'm sorry, on TikTok right now. So that's where I'm most active right now.
Yeah,
And
you guys go ahead.
I teach at Miami University of Ohio. So people want to track me down, you can also email me.
And what is your email?
I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to give out an email here, but if you go to Miami University of Ohio, you can easily find it. I'm the only.
That's fair. That's fair.
Hillel Gray at Miami University.
All right. So yeah, you guys, if you want to get in contact with Professor Gray, he just laid it all out. But I do highly implore you guys to go and follow him on TikTok if you guys have TikTok accounts. And once again, that is Prof PROF Gray GRAY. And I follow him and I watch all of his content. Some pretty interesting stuff. So and if you leave a comment, he will respond back. So if you are asking, so if you want to know anything, or if you guys got any disagreements when it comes to his videos on TikTok, just be prepared. When you make a statement, he will respond back. Thank you, Professor Gray, for coming on and being able to answer our questions. And enjoy the rest of your night.
Thanks.
Any last words?
No, it's been really great. I hope we stay in touch, Alden.
Yes, sir. We will. And Lord willing, I'll see you Sunday.
Oh, good. That'd be terrific. Yeah. So
All right.
you can tell people, I do convene a religious studies club, and people who are able to not be there to proselytize, not try to get people into religious debates, but really are just in the study of religion. And you can sort of tell the way, sort of the orientation I take towards it. If people are interested in that, contact me or contact Mr. Johnson, and we could try to get you set up for that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, once again, thank you, sir, for coming on, and enjoy the rest of your night.
Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, bye. All right, so yeah, you guys heard that. You guys seen that. And once again, I'm pretty sure that, he said some things that we all disagree with at one point or another, but we just wanted to get the information out there. We wanted to know what um people in the Jewish world, what are their points, or what are their takes on some of those questions that we have, especially us as Christians, as evangelicals, even some of you guys who do consider yourselves to be Israel. And I know that there was a lot more questions that could have been asked, and there could have been a lot more clarity that you guys may have been looking for. But if you guys need a little more clarity, I would, highly recommend that you guys reach out to Professor Gray via TikTok, and also on the University of Miami, Ohio website. And he would love to answer your questions. You guys can reach out to him. But once again, man, I just want to thank you guys for showing up, especially guys like Brother Chalice Jordan, Jermaine Howell. It's up now. He's here. We also saw Brother Dunamis. We see Brother Chris Spivey. We also have Keith Jefferson, Rashard D. All of you guys. And I think that, who was that? I think it was Rashard D who dropped the super chat. Yeah, it was Rashard D who dropped the super chat earlier. So thank you. I really appreciate the super chat. I always appreciate the support that you guys give. And before we get ready to head out, we have, hold on, let me change my audio real quick, because I got to get the sound effects going. So 1 second. All right, there we go. All right, so let's give a quick shout out to our members, people who, once again, support the channel on a monthly basis. We have Leader for Christ. We have Miss Ephesians 2:10, Dunamis. You guys see him. He was in the chat, and he was on the panel. Joseph Roberts, Nicole Smith, Latrell Hassel, D Mav, Ambassador Everett. I'm Chris Duke, Roger Sherman, Anthony Hall, Darrell Lloyd, Muntree Shira, and Natalia Plummer. Let's give it up for them. Thank you guys. Greatly appreciate you guys' patronage. And with that, man, we're going to get ready to get up out of here. So let me get ready to get my stuff started. But yeah, I think this was a pretty good conversation. And as always, if you guys haven't subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do so right now. Hit that subscribe button. On your way out, hit that like button, rate it, share it, comment once this video is over. And you guys enjoy the rest of your night. Have a blessed night. And I think me and Keith are going to be trying to do something tomorrow. So you guys stay tuned for that. Me and Keith may be going live. And I will see you guys next time.
Yeah, let's try to make it happen for real.